am darkness incarnate. Get ready to part with your heart. I'm a demigod of the forest, bringing demons in my apartment. Got toxic vomit, a snake. There ain't no stopping this train. Fucked up, got caught with the murder weapon. They dropping the case. Ay, I come from the other side. Ay, fuck them other guys. Ay, turn it up a notch. Ay, up an echelon. Fuck what they all say. Don't wanna pop up, sing like Beyonce. Cut 'em up, beat 'em up like an entree. And I throw good hands like I'm on stage. Chopper make you dance like Hannah Montana. Cockin' with a mag that look like a banana. You a target, you a mark. Lucky I ain't a scammer, but I pull up with the mask or the green bandana. Shit, I'm so drenched in the darkness, sitting in my dungeon practicing the dark arts. Witchcraft in my past, I could read between the cracks. Take a part in a ritual to bring a demon back. Oof.
So the idea for this beat came from the fact that it is spooky season. It's in full effect, and I've been doing a lot of dark, scary trap beats in the style of like MTM, Lil Mexico, you know, Fat Nick, Shakewell, Booby Ludovelli. That's the kind of stuff I've been listening to that's really appealing to me. So let's start off talking about the melody. We'll move into the percussion, and then we'll talk about the details. I made this beat solely using sounds from Sytrus, so something free and accessible for everybody, and only default presets, so nothing extra you really have to download. You should have them all in your library already. I began with a bell type sound. It's got a little sequence to it, some tone, some drone, called Jupiter, and I gave it a slight shift here just to give it, you know, a little bit more of a natural feel. What you're hearing is it without any effects on it, and this is the original melody that I began with. It was just these 4 notes, C sharp, C, and G. That's where it all began. Then I placed some lower notes. Same notes, just a different voicing and a little bit of syncopation. So you can see here, you got to add some bounce here. You don't just want 4 metric notes repeating the whole time or it ends up sounding boring. So here's the melody. And you could hear I added a G and a G sharp up high to give it some texture throughout, keep it from being so repetitive. Now let's talk about the effects chain. So now I'm going to play it for you how I have it in the song. I actually wrote it like this and then squished it down because I used gross beat, half speed as one of the main effects here. So you can see, started off with a gross beat, half speed. Then I went to Fruity Blood Overdrive. Just gave it a little crunchy texture. Added Effector, the vocal effect, with just a little bit of signal, not too intense, just subtle. Next, I added Isotope Vinyl, mostly for the warp depth to give it some detune, and changed the year to 1960 to make it a little more thin and realistic sounding. Gross beat for before the drop, not important now. And an EQ. So I cut the bass out, and kind of bumped the mid, and cut a little bit of the high frequency out because it was a little crispy. So sounds like this. Sounds a lot more authentic and has a lot more character than just the plain pattern. So the next thing I added is called Taco Bell. It's a preset in Sytrus. And what I did with this was I did adjust some of the envelopes here and just shorten them so they didn't ring out as much and just were a little more plucky. But you don't have to do that. It just depends on the sound you're going for. But what I wanted here was some sliding notes and some bends to give it, you know, some more character and more depth. And I always like that sound. So the way I did that was, again, I wrote this stretched out like this and then squished it with gross beat, half speed. So this is what those slides sound like without any effects on them. It's a cool little pattern, you know. It just sounds kind of messy and weird, and you know, I like that. So But the real fun came in when I squished it down, like I said, made it a little quicker, obviously, double timed it, and added my gross beat, half speed, almost the exact same effect chain. Same effector vocals, same gross beat, half speed, same vinyl effect. But the way I introduce it is with a filter, automating the cutoff frequency, and it sounds like this. And then when the song really begins and drops, I do a quick cut like this. And fade it in and bring in that full sound so that eventually you hear this alongside the original. And then all together, those two sound like this. I've panned one to the left and one to the right. And as you can see, I've cranked the stereo separation on these. They're not the most stereo sounds from Sytrus, so it always gives it a little more fullness. But that all depends on your personal taste. I like the way it sounds. So the next piece of melody that I wrote was this synthesizer. It's called Echo Crows. It's a Sytrus preset, and it sounds awesome. So let me give you a taste of how that sounds. I didn't really mix this at all. I just kind of let it be what it was. A few high notes, really simple: G, G sharp, C, C sharp. Not so much melody, more just atmosphere, and to hear that layered with the rest of it. Really gives you a nice spooky atmosphere that sounds real creepy and full. You know, it doesn't sound cheap. That's the most important thing. Is you don't want your sounds to sound like Sytrus presets. You want it to sound like something original of your own. This one luckily just sounded good without any mixing. It was the other two that really required some elbow grease to get them to sound like an appropriate, trap beat sound. So the next section of things I want to talk about is the drums and the bass and, the drop, the meat of the beat. So the important stuff, right? First, let's start off looking at the hi-hat pattern and the clap and snare and all that good stuff. That's normally where I start. That kind of gives me the basis for where I want to take the bass line and the kick. I start to hear it in my head. So it all started like this. 2 hi-hats, a clap, some crashes, and a couple open hi-hats. We'll start with looking at the hi-hat pattern here. Here's my main hi-hat pattern, and we'll listen to this all together. So, pretty straightforward, honestly. Just some fast rolls interspersed with some 8th notes. Changing the pitch of them, going down, then coming back up. Just keeping it with some variety. Not having the same fast rolls at the same pitch, repeatedly keeps it sounding from so repetitive. And the other layer of hi-hat here is basically the same pattern, just simpler. So you can see that I just removed the faster notes, essentially. And I panned one left and one right. I have these 2 hi-hats here. Sounds slightly different. And one interesting thing I did was I shifted this one here with your little wrench here. You go to shift and crank that up a little bit. And they're not hitting on the exact same time, so you can hear them independently, and it gives it a lot more depth. It just sounds a lot more alive and realistic. Couple open hi-hats. These are all from the MZ kit. Every percussion instrument I use is from the same kit, and I'll provide a link for that so it'll be easy to find. Another interesting thing that I did that I always like to do in my beats is, this is my main snare, my main clap, whatever you want to call it. It's a clap, obviously, but it acts like, your snare. So I have it, most hits are that, but I like to layer in this one under it every other hit. That way you get a, more variety to the sound, and it doesn't become so repetitive and boring, basically. And then, of course, I added just a crash here, and then some metric rides throughout, just to give it some more flavor and sound more full and metal. Nothing too crazy. Pretty straightforward. Next, let's look at the bass and the kick drum. So the kick drum is my normal go-to kick. It's Jury. It's in the MZ kit as well. And I enabled clipping and boosted it slightly to give it some edge, some dirty. And then I shifted the frequency really high, made it super duper loud, because that's how I want it. I want the kick to really drive the beat. That's the style. And then I filtered it slightly so it's not so crispy and loud. And the rhythm goes like this. I'm going to play it with the drum pattern here. And that goes along with the bass line, which is the angry 808 with a little bit of fuzz. Like I said, same thing. Boost the gain, let it clip, shift the frequency, but I filtered this a lot. I really wanted it to be, real, just thick, bassy, nothing too crazy. I might even go without the boost completely. Just depends on how you like it. Sometimes you want that extra fuzz. Maybe just a little bit of it sounds good. Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, so there it is, and then here's the bass line on its own. It's really just C sharp and C, and a couple high G sharp notes in there for the transitions, and here's the bass line on its own. So you can see, it's pretty simple and straightforward. The name of the game here was Space. I wanted the percussion to really shine and leave room for vocals. I didn't want it to be too overwhelming with all these, melodic elements with a lot of spacey reverb and just, all these sounds and all this sonic space. I wanted to, leave it some room and let it breathe. So let's hear that all together, our kick drum, our bass line, and our percussion. Sounds awesome. Now let's hear it all together with our melodic elements. The last thing I want to talk about are the details. So that means my automations and my transitions, sound effects, mixing, all that stuff. So the song begins with just that first bell pattern I showed you and a lot of reverb and the dry signal just being automated from nothing to, normal as the entire mix level of the reverb goes down. So I'll show you that in real time here. If you just watch the knob here, this is the mix level and then the dry signal. And then after it fades in, I introduced the slides with my filter trick here, and then I brought the bells up an octave. And right before it drops, I added an effect here that again is Sytrus. It's a preset called Flow, and here's what it sounds like without any effects. It's an awesome little glide laser down, builds some tension before a drop. The only thing I did was I added gross beat. I actually went to a preset in patterns and selected Chaos 4, and then it sounded like this, which I thought was great for before a drop, so I used it. The only other thing I did was I added a gross beat before the drop as well on the main bell here, and we'll let you hear that. Here, just glide down ever so slowly. So yeah, builds up all that tension and deliciousness. The only other thing we need to talk about is the rest of the structure and how I completed the beat, and I wrote a B section. So the B section would be right here, and then I also continued just some different structuring here that I'll show you. I added this little moan breath sound effect. And you can hear there's some delay on here. I did the stereo effect, and I set the time to 4 steps. I turned it down so it's not so obnoxious. Sounds great. And the big change here from, you know, the beginning of the drop to the second part is I removed the slide part, so you're really just hearing the bells on their own. And I removed these scratches, which let's talk about those. So the way that I made these vinyl scratches, which if you were paying attention, you heard them before, is I took a impact that sounded like a lot of white noise, right? And then I just normalized it, made it kind of flat and chopped it up and just repeated it. And then I went to Grossby and started making a preset of scratches. You can really get creative here. The important thing is that double curve and half sine are the type of curves you want to be using. They're most effective, I think, for making realistic sounding record scratches. And then you want to make sure that you use your volume section here to chop it up and make a clear, concise rhythm out of it. So another important trick is that you have 2 or more different patterns so it doesn't get so repetitive. And it's quicker to just make them on slot 1 and 36 so you can automate between them easily. So when you create the automation clip, you know, 1 is going to be 0%, 36 is going to be 100%. So you can see here, that's how I automated it. And let's listen to it. And you can actually see it move in here in real time. So yeah, that's always fun. I'm actually going to turn that up a little bit because I really like how that sounds. And of course, before we move into the other section, I just cut out the percussion, cut out the bass, everything, gave it a little room for, you know, the slides and the bells to shine through, and the slides to kind of give their last moment in the spotlight before it's just time for the bells. I also cut off those slides so you can see Taco Bell to that preset. I automated the volume here so that it's just a complete silent cut to the next part. The only other difference, like I said, is the scratches here only appear in the final bar of these 4-bar sections as a transition. So you'll hear that. Just gives those transitions a lot more impact and breath. So that's pretty much most of the beat. That's it, really. That's all of the elements and all the details. The only thing is right here, I let the kick drum go and just let the 808 carry the bass rhythm here, and it just gives you kind of a cool, unique bounce. It's something I like to do in a lot of beats, so you'll hear that. I also reverbed the bells again there. Give it some pacing. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. If there's anything else you'd like to learn. And let me know if you'd like to hear the way I mixed my vocals on the rap you heard in the intro. We can talk about that in another video. So I really appreciate you guys watching, and I hope you come back for more. Everybody, make some motherfucking bangers.
Catching pause if it crosses me, no remorse, I'm an oddity. Out of space, ain't no David Bowie, I'm talking about Scott Ridley. Really? Fuckers get killed, acting silly.